Words are the tools I use to talk to a lot of people at one time. So my job is to communicate effectively with all the residents in Texarkana, which means I have to write press releases or speeches, I have to create content for a website. Everything I do is aimed at creating a message that's easy to understand and oftentimes very succinct in a short amount of words. So a lot of the time there's not time for a proofreader or anyone to check my work. I have to be really careful about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it.
As a nurse, effective writing skills are very important. One of the main roles as a nurse is to be a patient advocate. In order for me to advocate for my patients, I have to be able to communicate effectively, and most of that communication is through written form. And if I can't communicate the patient's needs to the physician correctly or effectively and in a concise manner, then the patient's needs aren't going to be met, and then there's a barrier. So effective writing skills are very important.
Effective writing skills are very important in the funeral service profession because you write obituaries for families that's placed in your local newspapers. Sometimes it's also placed in national newspapers. We also write death certificates, and that information has to be correct. It's also important because once you're in this profession, we have a tight-knit community, and if you make a mistake in anything that you're writing, it can be community information, meaning within our profession. And that is a career killer if you make a mistake, because that's going to be discussed. It's going to be a topic of discussion, not just over the phone, over the text messages, but maybe even at meetings, at conferences. They may mention it. So it does kind of follow you around. You want to make sure you get that correct and you really study in that class, because that is very important, and that's a very important part of our profession.
Well, I've had several careers in the business world, in newspapers and working for corporate communications, also teaching, and I can tell you there's nothing more important than good writing skills. In the newspaper business, that's what you do. You write for an audience of people that want news and information. In the business world, you're writing for various audiences. You're writing for customers, potential customers, higher executives, and your coworkers. And in teaching, it's really important to be able to communicate, simply because you're teaching how important it is in the world in which we're going to go out and work.
Mostly our communication is electronic on computers, and it's very concise, short statements to get the point across and hopefully provide the quickest care to the patient. There's many times when physical assessments or documentation isn't correctly charted, and then the patient's care is impaired because of that. For example, if you charted that a patient's condition was one thing on admission and then it changes a couple days later, it could not only affect the patient's care but also possibly put the hospital at risk for fees, costs, things that insurance won't pay for because of the patient's general condition.
There are several types of written communication. One could be a case analysis report. That's when you take the deceased into the prep room and you mark on a sheet of paper that you're going to keep in that loved one's file of all of the markings on the body, any kind of incisions that you make. We also have death certificates that you have to fill out and obituaries that you write for the family. A lot of times the family will bring in their own obituary, maybe on a thumb drive or handwritten. They may even type it up for you. But most of the time, you will be the one writing that obituary.
Well, I worked in the business world. I worked in internal and external communication. So I was writing for employees of 6,000 up to 6,000 employees, and also for a vast audience of suppliers and users of our product. In newspapering, you're writing for your neighbors, and so you have to be very, very careful about how you write and what you put to make sure everybody understands the subject matter.
I use everything from formal communication to informal on a daily basis. A lot of times I'm writing for the city council, and in that case I write briefings that are very formal and structured. And on the other hand, I'll write a social media update on Twitter or Facebook, which can be informal and apply to the rules a little less so. A lot of times my writing has to appeal to people who have a lot of education, and then also young children who may not understand the message if I use big words or long sentence structures. So it just depends on the situation. But having a good grasp on the written word is important to my job.
I would think that any student that's in the Composition 1 class would hopefully never think that writing was not important or that class was not important for this profession, because it absolutely is. Your writing skills can make or break you. If you're a good embalmer or you're a good funeral director, if you can't write effectively, you will not continue in this profession. I promise. You have to have those skills. So take this class very seriously. It will only help you, not hurt you.
There's nothing more important than good writing skills. And here's why. You go out and apply for a job, and you actually are writing to someone you may not even know. You're putting in an application, you're putting in a resume, you're putting in a cover letter, and the only thing they've got is what you give them. There's 3 stacks that I've always used whenever I was hiring anybody. I have one stack for, oh, this is potentially really good. I'm going to go back and look at this in a minute. The second stack is if the first stack doesn't work out, this is a maybe. And the third stack goes in the trash. If you don't have good writing skill, you'll end up in the trash, because that's first impressions mean everything when you're looking for a job. And I also like to say that you got to be careful what you write in all situations, because Facebook, for example, is a classic place where people go when they're looking at applicants. They see a name, they go out and do a search, they look at Facebook, and they will check your writing and what you do on Facebook. So it's always, remember, you're always out in the public eye, and social media has enhanced that in not necessarily a good way.
You know, I can't think of one career that you don't have to write for your job. Whether you're a doctor that's writing prescriptions or a case study about your research. Maybe you're an engineer who has to write out a plan for constructing a building. Or maybe you're managing other people, human resources manager or a big president or CEO of a company. You're going to have to write at some point in your career. And I think it's really important to take this opportunity in a college environment, in a learning setting, to master the written skills that you need to succeed later on. You know, audiences vary. Everyone has a different mindset when they sit down to read what you've written. Mm-hmm. So you have to be sure that the words you use are succinct and clear in communicating your points.
At first, when I took composition, I probably had those same thoughts that it was just unnecessary, it was just a wasted course. But after I took it, and I'm now further on in my career, I realized the importance of it. Being able to convey my message effectively to the doctors, other nurses involved in the patient's care. It's very important to be able to get that across in a manner that they can understand and that the patient's care can be, benefited because of that. If I didn't have this course, I really feel like as a nurse, I probably wouldn't be as effective. And I don't think it really matters if you're a nurse or whatever career you go into. Effective communication is important, starting from your resume all the way up to working at whatever job it may be.